So once again, everyone, good afternoon. Good afternoon and welcome. Welcome to Friends of Europe and welcome to our annual conference on Africa. This time, we're calling it Africa Transforming. I'm Shada Islam. I'm Director for Europe and Geopolitics here at Friends of Europe, and I'm working with my team, including Amanda, Augusta, and Rahul, who have brought all our panelists here and yourselves here as well. So, Europe, Africa, Africa, Europe. Whichever way you put it, this relationship, our relationship, Europe-Africa, is a deep and long-lasting relationship. And I think in a relationship that is ever more important in today's very difficult, challenging, and troubling world. We need to work together on many key challenges of the 21st century. But in order to do that, here at Friends of Europe, we firmly believe that we need to change things around. We need to make this relationship more relevant, more credible, and really pertinent to today's problems. So we at Friends of Europe are doing this ourselves. If you go on our website today, I have a Frankly Speaking there which says, it is time for Africa. It's time for Europe to change its groupthink on Africa, to change its perceptions of Africa, to change the African narrative here in Europe. And the same thing really applies to what's happening in Africa when Africans look at Europe. And I think this is the right time to do so. We're also working in a high-level group with Mo Ibrahim Foundation and the One Campaign, also talking about changing perceptions and working really on practical things. Now, you saw some of those practical things this afternoon at our master classes. We had a session on how I am changing Africa, and this was run by young Africans and Europeans about their initiatives to change perceptions, but also to tackle real issues to do with climate change, energy, all of those important issues that challenge us today. So what are we going to do now? We're going to talk about women, peace, and governance. One of the key issues that we think are often ignored here in Europe when we look at what's happening in Africa. And it's important that we do so now, because as all of you know, we're going to have leadership changes here in Brussels, a new European Parliament, 70% new MEPs in the Parliament, also new leadership at the European Commission, at the EU Council of Ministers. So the right time to tackle the issues of changing perceptions, of transforming Africa. Our first session is about women, peace, and governance, as I said, and we are delighted to have with us Ms. Kamisa Kamara. She's Minister for Digital Economy and Planning from Mali. And Kamisa, you used to be a foreign minister for Mali as well, and you were one of the youngest or the youngest foreign ministers in Africa, or perhaps even the world. So really thank you for coming here. And you're rushing off to Paris afterwards, so you have a very busy agenda. Really delighted also to have with us Ms. Elisabeth Guigou. She's president now of the Anna Lindh Foundation, but of course also a very influential European leader, foreign minister, Minister for European Affairs of France as well. Thank you very much indeed, Elisabeth, for being here with us as well. Dorcas Onyango. Dorcas is Sustainability Director for South and East Africa at the Coca-Cola Company, based in Joburg. Thank you for coming. And last but not least, we have Chiara Adamo from DevCo. Now, you'll say, 4 women and a woman moderator, talking about women. Well, guys, we did try to find some men, and they were on our agenda. I promise you, they were on our agenda. But you know, they say women are unpredictable. Well, those 2 men had to drop out for very valid reasons, but still, there you are. But I think, you know, this is a collective brainstorm. The rules of the game are very simple. I'm going to put a question to all of you, follow up, and then open the floor. Lots of expertise here in the room, and we should benefit from it. So let's kick off. I'm going to kick off with you, Kamisa. So, you know, we sort of assume that women do things differently, and we need more women in power in Africa and in Europe if we're going to tackle challenges of bringing peace, prosperity, and good governance. Why women?
Thank you for a very dynamic introduction, and hello, everyone. Since we're talking about peace, about governance, about women's leadership in Africa, I think it's good to remind ourselves that because of crisis, because of conflicts, because of political turmoil in Africa, throughout the continent, women have challenged non-traditional roles. They have taken on non-traditional roles when there were conflicts. And because of that, thanks to that, they were able to basically gain legitimacy after conflict was over. You will remember that it's post-war Liberia that elected the first women president. You would remember that it's the post-genocide Rwanda that had over 50% of women's representation in parliament. It's post-apartheid South Africa that had the most gender-sensitive constitution. So I believe that there is a trend that has been going on for many years. It's not an exception. It's not a surprise that women are taking on leadership roles in Africa. It's the general context that has changed. I think going over and beyond the obvious, that we make up more than 50% of the population, that we make up over 50% of the world's entrepreneurs. That's important to know. Yep. And that we are the leaders of our homes and of our families. So we're here. And that's why women.
Yeah, exactly. So, Camisa, there are governments in Africa that have made really kind of bold steps forward, right? You've got South Africa just announcing a cabinet of 14 men and 14 women. You've got Ethiopia doing it, and of course you mentioned Rwanda. Is that enough? Are they the beginning of a wave, can we say, or are they just sort of one-off holdouts?
Difficult question. I think it's very positive. It's very important that those countries are making those strides. It's sad that we see them as exceptions and as exceptional situations. What we need to look at is the sustainability of having those women in government. We're making strides because women are not anymore responsible for only ministries such as culture or women and family planning. I'm not downgrading those ministries. They are as equally important. But when you see now women at the head of defense ministries or foreign affairs or other critical ministries, I think there is hope that we can have.
Right, okay, and just one final thing. Do you think that the environment is an enabling one? I mean, previously we were speaking and you said that sometimes people still can't believe that you are a minister because you're a woman and you're young. Have those things changed a little bit now with time?
I think that if those things haven't changed, they are going to change. I think that there is just obvious developments that are going on. Some people are having a hard time getting used to it, and it's just the way it is.
Right, thank you very much. So let's turn to Europe, Elizabeth. So as I said, you've held some very important positions in France. You were in the European Parliament as well. You've been a leader in your areas as well. Do you think that when you look at Africa, when you look at Europe, why aren't there more women in positions of power yet?
Well, because
it's on?
Yes, it is. It seems to be.
It is on.
Yeah.
Voilà, ça marche. Because it's difficult, and because societies are not used to have women in a position of equality with men, and it was, of course, much more difficult years ago. When I started in my career in the civil service or in politics, there were very few women. I was the first Minister of Justice in France.
That's right.
And this was regarded as something extraordinary. Since then, there have been many. But the reason why more and more people recognize that we need to empower women, to help them to fight their way in society, is really, I think, because they realize that women can really be very positive actors in the whole fields of society. For one simple reason is that women and girls are used from the beginning, from the very day of their birth, to fight their way in society. And therefore, they have to be recognized inside the family, then at school, then in their career, and therefore they tend to be, very dynamic. The second reason is that, which I have observed in all my responsibilities, is that when there are difficulties on the ground, women tend to act together. For example, when I was elected in France, in Seine-Saint-Denis, I was a deputy at the National Assembly. My constituency was a very popular one, and there were lots and lots of, because of inequalities, there were lots and lots of security problems. Mm-hmm. Now, who were the ones in the towns to tackle this subject, to say, we are going to fight the traffics of drugs, we are going to have patrols, late at night, not to let our children be out of our house after 8 or 9 o'clock in the evening. They were the women. And because they were the ones who were on the ground, they were respected by all sorts of people, much more than, I would say, the police. So this capacity of women to act together mm-hmm. is something very, very positive, of course. And the third reason why there is a growing consciousness of the fact that it is foolish from societies to put women apart and not to recognize mm-hmm. what can be brought to society through gender equality is because women are used from the beginning of their life to work on very concrete questions. They are less talkative, maybe, and more, in action. And I think that our responsibility is to empower women. That's what we do. We try to do in the ALF Foundation. We have more than 60% of young girls, because we work with youth, essentially, of young girls and women in our programs. And when we educate, when we have in our programs to our education to intercultural dialogue, we see that if we have more women, it's because they want to be active citizens. Right. And I think that's very good for everyone.
So just a quick 2 follow-ups on that. So you have said, and rightly so, that women play an important role in society in keeping peace and, working to bring people together. And yet you have the myth of the strong man. Right? When things go wrong, people think, we need a strong man, a so-called strong man to come and take over. That seems to be the psyche, if you like, of people. So, And the second thing is, in peace negotiations, right? Peace settlement negotiations, international, there are very few women at the table. And though there have been studies that show that women, when they are part of the peace discussions, negotiations, those peace treaties tend to last longer. So I was wondering if you had any comments on those 2 points.
Well, first, because there are less women in politics than men. Why? Because, a lot of women think that politics or that kind of engagement is not for them. So they have to. We have to show to all the women in our societies that there should not be a glass ceiling. Mm-hmm. And this is a matter of education from the beginning, in the families.
Right. In Africa as in Europe, obviously.
Yes, yeah. And that, of course, young girls like young boys are prepared to do what they want to do in life. And politics is very often a sort of a taboo, for women. So it's complicated.
It's a dirty game. Politics is a very dirty game.
Yes, but anyway.
Well, you've survived.
No, I'm not saying that. But when you see, for example, the work that has been done by Cathy Ashton and by Federica Mogherini on the negotiations with Iran, on the nuclear agreement, which is, put down by President Trump, it was remarkable. On the negotiations by Cathy Ashton in the Balkans, between the Serbs, the Kosovar, that was remarkable. And I remember very well Cathy Ashton saying, I think I won between the Serbs and Kosovo, when I said, I bought a bottle of champagne, and I said, look, this is the bottle of champagne I should have drunk with my family for my birthday. Now I am with you, so you're going to make peace. And you know, it's a matter of engagement, but then you have to empower women to go in politics, and they are very positive actors. You were talking about climate change, for example. It's remarkable. I mean, they know what it is all about. You don't have really to explain a lot about that. Right. They know what they have to do because they work on the ground, from the beginning.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. So, Dorcas, now we've talked about government, and obviously Elizabeth has talked about the role of the family as well. But in business in Africa, are certain... Can you sense progress and development and change?
Thank you. First of all, let me say that business is not different from society. We are part of society, so we are concerned for women as anybody else is. There may be a profit angle to it, and that's okay. But let me go back to what's happening. There has been huge progress made. Certainly in Africa, we're seeing more women CEOs. The problem is there are not enough of them. There are statistics showing that women are graduating out of college in larger numbers than boys. Why aren't we seeing them in boardrooms in that same, large numbers? And this is the issue that corporates need to think about.
Why is it? Why is it?
It is because, in my opinion, a woman has several roles by default. Our default setting is that you will be a mother, you will be a wife, and then you have a role. That comes with challenges. For a woman to exist in the corporate world, the playing field needs to be leveled. And we need to see more policies that enable women to succeed. And that means that the game has to be developed with the woman's practicality and dual role in mind. Currently, the corporate world is built on what it was when it was a man's world. But today, it's not a man's world.
So business is keeping up or not keeping up with politics in the sense of Rwanda, Ethiopia, South Africa? In those countries, do you see women in business progressing as well?
Certainly, I do see women progressing. I'm here today because women are progressing. Is it enough? I don't think so. I don't think we should be sitting here, as Kasima said, talking about women being empowered. It's a long way to come. But I think also, as I said, corporates are members of the society, so we need to be looking at where the issues are greatest, and that's in our communities. Certainly in Africa, where poverty is most prevalent in the world, 70% of the poor are still women, and we are concerned as business.
That's right. So I was going to talk, so we talk a lot about women and we're automatically thinking of urban women, right? What about the rural women? I was just going to ask you that actually. What's happening there?
Because women are cornerstones of societies, I think when you think about women and their plight, you've got to think about all women, not only women in rural and in urban societies. I don't want to be an empowered woman when there's rural women in large numbers waiting to be economically empowered. But this is why corporates like ourselves, I work for Coca-Cola, are looking at how our business can open up and expand economic opportunities for women, particularly because our business has an expansive reach. We get to where many people are not able to get, and so it comes with a responsibility that those communities, largely who are women, get an opportunity to gain from our business operating in that kind of area. So rural women, urban women, their economic empowerment is foundational for all our sustainability as human beings.
Right, because Elizabeth talked about glass ceilings. There's also the concept of sticky floors, and the sticky floors that keep women down when in fact they could be progressing. So thank you very much to three of you. Let me turn to you now, Chiara. So in terms of the European Union's relationship with Africa, there's many treaties, conventions, all kinds of sectors under review, trade and aid. Is the gender question high enough up on the agenda?
Well, the gender issue is never high enough. Having said that, yes, in our relations with Africa, gender equality and empowerment of women and girls is constantly on the agenda. It's on the agenda of the big majority of our policy dialogues, and we do invest in gender, and we do partner with our African colleagues, because there is a realization, more and more a realization on all sides, as my commissioner uses to say, that promoting gender is not only the right thing to do, but also economically the smart thing to do. You might have heard of this one, and it is true. So when you realize that if we would curb by 10% gender inequality in Africa, this would raise possibly GDP by 2% over 5 years, that gives you an economic justification for it. And then coming back to what the other speaker said, I mean, and all research and studies that we have conducted shows it. Women political empowerment, women's role in leadership, in local governments, in national decision making, does contribute to make the right decisions for the communities as a whole, in terms of quality of life, in terms of looking at minorities, and not only women, but I think about ethnic minorities and others, and there are clear figures for it. There is a correlation between lack of democratic governance and inequalities, and I believe the role of women in governance is fundamental if we also want to curb inequalities in the world. And I'm not talking of Africa too, because we have our own issues, so, as you know.
Absolutely. And with because the African Union, Camisa, has brought out a gender diversity agenda as well, agenda promotion, etc. Is the European Commission, the European Union working with the AU on this, let's say, blueprint for gender empowerment, women's empowerment?
Yes, indeed. So in 2010, the African Women's Decade set a number of priorities. If you look at our European Gender Action Plan for 16-20, you find the same priorities. We have key pillars. We are working together with the Africa and the states and African Union. These are essentially economic empowerment. This is political participation. And it is, of course, also empowering women movement and curb violence. And in terms of the role of women in peace and security, this is very high on our agenda, on the UN agenda, and there we have a close cooperation with the African Union, where actually we're investing, I think, something around 730 million in the last few years, really to make sure that women get a central role in peace processes, in mediation, for all the good reasons that the other speakers.
Okay, thank you very much to all four of you for sort of kick-starting our reflection on this. Now, we have a Slido that we're going to test drive now, and we've asked a question which is basically, what are the most effective policies to ensure that more women come into leadership? So if I could have the PowerPoint going up, and to play the Slido game, you have to, on your iPhones, go to www.sly.do. And then you have to enter the hashtag, you can see it here as well, enter the hashtag Africa Summit. And then the question to be asked, and I have to look at it here, is what would be the most effective in bringing more women into leadership positions? So I'll go back to the four of you afterwards to see what we're said. So the first answer could be, is it about raising awareness to tackle patriarchal cultural norms? The second question is affirmative action to promote women in government administrations, the civil service, etc. And the third is introducing women's quotas in political parties. And the fourth is implementing gender-friendly social policies, so creches and things like that. So let's see what you come up with. What do you think is the most important, most effective way of ensuring that there are more women in leadership positions? So this could be leadership anywhere, politics, society, economics, at home, families. Let's give it a few more seconds. Has everyone, do you need a little bit more time, or have you responded? 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 Men as well as women? Okay, right. So, ladies, as you can see, the results are, I think, quite telling, right? A lot, I say 45 and counting % of our wonderful audience participation here, 42 now, says that it's about tackling patriarchal cultural norms. And then my question to you would be, how do we do that? So think about that. 33% think affirmative action to promote women in government administrations. This is something, of course, that the European Union governments and the EU institutions have done, I would say, quite effectively. At least we see the results, right? Gender-friendly social policies, 20%. So I guess that's family leave, maternity leave, paternity leave, etc. And then not many people in favor of women's quotas in political parties. Okay, right. So, Camisa.
I like the answers. I believe that patriarchal norms are probably the main obstacle that we have currently when it comes to pushing women to being leaders. And even when they become leaders, they face a lot of issues because of those patriarchal norms. And I've seen many women resign from their jobs. I've been in government for less than a year, and I've seen many just give up, saying that they just could not deal with all of that. So I would say that patriarchal norms and norms in general do tend to fade away when there is a situational change. And I believe that the more we're going to have women in government and in governance, patriarchal norms will have to change if women actually decide to stay despite whatever is happening.
Right. Could you please put up the results of the Slido once more on the screens? I need to be reminded of how many people said what. Thank you so much. That's right. Okay, so Camisa, you said if there are enough women and they can prove that they can do it, so norms will change. But proactively, do government policies help to change the norms, or is it the other way around?
So I even wanted to add another answer to that, and that would have been implementing the policies that already exist. I don't know one African country that doesn't have an actual policy when it comes to women. They do exist, but they're not implemented. I believe that, first of all, they need to be implemented. Mali has, for example, a 30% quota, which is a law. It's just not...
30% quota for civil service?
In government and in parliament. And we're far from that, even though we try to get as close to 30% as possible. We're happy when we're at 10%. So there is an issue there that needs to be corrected. And I think it's implementing the quotas that we already have, or the laws and the policies that already exist.
Okay, so it's a kind of a virtuous circle. The more women there are, the more the society evolves.
I believe that it will go this way.
Okay, Elizabeth, your point of view. Are you surprised by this? Would it be the same if we were talking about...
No, I think that those are very intelligent questions and answers, really. The first is a cultural question. When we can measure that in the ALF Foundation, because when in all our programs, especially Young Mediterranean Voices, where we have a majority of women, as I said previously, we can see that the gender question comes very quickly on discussion between young male and female. And it's very important that it is so, because there are all sorts of, prejudice, all sorts of stereotypes that we have to fight. And it's really a question of education from the very beginning. And all they all lifelong. The second thing is, what can we do to promote gender equality? Now, I think that policies are absolutely crucial. When there is a very visible will to promote women, then it has an effect. And of course, although politics and political parties are not very well considered in our days, I think that it is very important that we have adequate laws. For example, in France, when I was Minister of Justice, I conducted the reform of our constitution to promote gender equality in elections. Mm-hmm. And now we have, each time we have a list election, the law enforces political parties to have one man, one woman, or one woman and one man, and not, and in a very precise alternance, so that you do not find the women at the end of the list and all the men before. And it is very important because now it would be judged, in France at least, awkward to have a government where there is not an equality between the representation of men and women. Now, it's not enough. In the day-to-day work, what remains to be done is to promote methods of working that take into account the fact that one woman with a career, with a family, with sometimes a political engagement, has 2 or 3 lives at the same time. Right, yeah. And therefore, there should not be meetings after 6 in the evening, no? And there should be a restricted field for talks, and so that they do not last too long. And you know, women who are at the head of big companies, like you are, they try to enforce that, right. And I think they should be helped.
Yes, Dorcas? And then we'll turn to the audience.
I agree. There should be no meetings after 6 p.m.
Right, this one goes on a little
Anywhere. Okay, so I do want to answer this a little bit from the point of view of who I am from private sector. What are the most effective policies? And I'll do this from experience of what we are doing as a company. I work in Africa in a program called 5 by 20. As I said, we want to empower 5 million women by 2020. And what we've seen is in Africa, women are actually very strong and very resourceful and very determined and very creative. What they need is to get economic enablement, and they will chart their social future and reality. They're busy surviving. As I said, 70% of people who are poor are women. Majority are in Africa. And a woman would die for her children and her community. Therefore, if we enable them economically, as we are doing through our program, and I have seen this firsthand, they get agency, yes. They get a voice, and they begin to change things for themselves. But more than that, I just think it's a smart economics to do. Women invest 90% of their income back into their children. Health, economy. Isn't that what government is trying to do? Just invest in women.
Very good point. Chiara, very briefly, I'll turn to the participants.
Yes, very briefly. I would agree with this in the sense that from what we see, it is about empowering women and girls and building role models like yourselves here, but it is also about engaging with men and boys. And what I see in Africa, demographic transition is helping because youth is simply fantastic. If you think at the experience of Djara Doucouré, a young lady, she changed the face of her country in terms of gender equality, girls' empowerment, and this was done through, essentially, from what I know, social media, a group of boys and girls join up. So I think we shouldn't forget the youth element in this. Yeah. And just a final word, I think the receipt, what we should do is really to build real partnerships. And I bring you one example. We have developed as European Union with the United Nations the so-called Spotlight Initiative. It's about eliminating all forms of violence against women and girls in the world. It covers all regions of the world. In Africa, it aims at harmful practices. And the novelty of it is not only about laws, as she was saying, it's also about implementing those,
Right.
bringing services, but most importantly, prevention and changing social norms. So it's the combination of all these factors and making sure that civil society is on board, not just as a lip service, but really as a partner that should make, I hope, a difference in this.
Thank you very much. So I'd like to now turn to you for comments and questions to our panelists. Because we've had the prerogative of having 4 wonderful female panelists, I'd like to give the floor for a change to young men in the audience. I normally go to the women first, but I'd like to give the floor to young men and get some points of view from European and African young men in the room, and then I assure you I'll open the floor to people old as me as well. So perhaps some of the younger men who are sitting here in the front row would like to tell us a little bit about their experience. So I see you. Please, could I have, please just introduce yourself very briefly and keep your comment short so we can get a lot of interaction.
Thank you very much. I'm Dr. Karunga Keita. I'm Regional Director for Sahel for Wetland International, based in Mali.
Welcome.
We have a lot of experiences in Niger Delta. So I can talk about Niger Delta. We remarked through about a century of studies on Niger Delta that the peace is highly linked to natural resources, availability and access, fair access for people, especially water. And in this optical, women have a big role to play. Women are first the biggest users of water in Niger Delta, because in Sahelian countries, the main capital is natural resources. So women are the main user of the resources first. Secondly, women have more influence on children and young people. So if women are involved in peace building commission through our experiences, the change will happen easily.
Right, and so are you encouraging this more in your organization? Are you encouraging it yourself, participation of women?
Yeah, and it depends also on the education of women. If women are educated, the children are rarely involved in terrorist group, in jihadist group. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to take a question from a young European man who would like to take the floor now. I have a few names I can call on, but maybe Jean-Guillaume, you would like to take the floor.
Hello, my name is Jean-Guillaume. I work for an NGO on education in Africa. And I don't really have any question, actually.
Yes, go ahead, please.
Yeah.
Go with your question.
No.
Go ahead. So you travel across Africa. You've got your NGO. How many women work with you? How many projects do you have where women are actually active members? Just give us a few details. Or are you?
I mainly work with women, actually.
Yeah.
There are 8 people involved at a high level in my organization, and it's 6 women with me and another friend.
And your organization is? Just tell us quickly.
HIS Adventures, Help, Inspire, Share Adventures. We are helping 11 education projects in Africa to make their actions bigger and longer on the timeline.
Right. Okay.
And yeah, so most of the people we work with, actually, we find women are more involved in development from my own experience than men, and we tend to have more women in NGOs and this kind of organization than men. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I'd like to open the floor to everyone now. So we've got the perspective from young men. Yes, very happy to take. Please, can I have a show of hands of other people who'd like to come in? Yes, I will give you the floor. Please, Raoul.
My name is Genge. I'm from the South African Embassy in Brussels. First, I want to thank the panelists for giving us this information. And extremely the lady on my left, I think she has made it very valuable, the one coming from the private sector. You know, just 2 points, maybe 3 points. I'm coming from South Africa. I want to propose that let's not consider South African situation an exception. If you say South Africa, Rwanda, Ethiopia, I'll talk about South Africa. First, is not an exception. It's something that I think Europe can learn lessons from. I want to get to that point. Maybe the learning now can be coming from the north to the south. Secondly, women have been fighting for the rights they have. This 50-50 gender parity that our government, the current government has, didn't come because of men's generosity. Women fought for it. Women fought for that. They fought for that from the political party, the ruling party, the African National Congress. And therefore, we shouldn't take it as an exception. It's an incremental development. It's not an exception. And then secondly, when women do get, and then of course our colleague from Mali, no, in South Africa, women do hold good portfolios that are held by any man. Defense, foreign affairs, intelligence, home affairs, amongst others, just to indicate that we are not confining them to traditional women roles. Third point, when women are given a position of authority in my country, South Africa, they've made tremendous impact. Take at some point there was a woman of health who, during her tenure as the woman of health, she banned smoking in public areas, except in identified areas. That was for the public good. It increased our health as a nation. When that lady was moved to the African Union, she piloted the Agenda 2063, right, which now is the pilot project of the African Union. I'm just saying, and then of course, during her tenure there, she also piloted what is called Silencing the Guns in 2020, which is about bringing peace to the African continent. Therefore, I'm saying, in short, that the African continent is providing lessons for the global community as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thank you for making the point about lessons for the global community as well. I'd like to give the floor now to anyone else who wants to come in. So I've got 2 hands going up over there. So let's take the lady over here first, and then here. Just keep your hand up, please.
Hello, my name is Nancy Jokoto. I work for the European Commission in the GGGEFCO. And I would have this question. How do you think the rise of populism in Europe, in other parts of the world, will impact the role of women in the future? And what is your view on building women networks? Do you agree with this approach, or do you think it's not something that would be appropriate?
Thank you very much for that very important question. Populism, far right, the pushback on women's empowerment within Europe, but also in many other parts of the world. Thank you very much. Could I take the question from here, please? Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Pascaline Gabory, Pilot for Dev. We are an NGO. We're working on women's rights in several countries, Kenya, Namibia, Jordan. We see that there are a lot of motivated, strong women with a lot of initiatives. We, however, see that what they say is that gender-based violence is often a problem which is generalized and which is creating problems both for entrepreneurship, employment, education, and access to facilities, or even access to political functions. What they say is also the question of opportunities. How do you create more opportunities, and how is it possible, as a link to the European Development Days, to reduce inequalities and territorial inequalities?
Thank you very much, Pascaline. I'm going to turn now back to the panel. So maybe, Dorcas, you can kick off with some of your comments on the 2 questions.
Okay, I'll start with how do we expand opportunities? What we're doing with our company is that we've opened the entire value chain for women. when I talked about empowering 5 women, what we've committed is to say in any part of our value chain, if there's an opportunity to empower women, so for example, water, we implement water as a matter of philanthropy. We're looking at 6 million women across Africa. But for me, the most important story is not that. Is that as part of implementing those projects, we train women, we consult them in the design and implementation. A huge part of the problem with water projects in Africa is sustainability. And we've found that when you train women to maintain the projects, you create economic opportunities for them in addition to providing something that they basically need. And this is an example of how we are doing it across several projects. In Rwanda, we implemented a project that serves 30,000 women. They create ventures, and what we've seen with these women is that they decided that they would use water to solve other problems. We are doing this with our producers, we are doing this in retail. We have an inclusive program that basically says if you're going to open a retail outlet in far beyond at the back of wherever any other economic opportunity is difficult, we give women the opportunity. It gives them the flexibility to run a business and to run their home. So it's about being practical, leveraging what you have, and looking futuristically. Some of these programs, the results from a corporate, which usually is measured on profit, we may not get profit today, but we know that the women are going to get profit and they'll build their societies.
So we know of quite a few women who are using the internet and the World Wide Web to actually e-commerce, to engage in e-commerce. Is that something you can tell us? I mean, is that a growing field in Africa as well, where women are being empowered economically through the internet, sales, e-commerce, etc.?
I know more of the cell phone. The mobile phone has leapfrogged Africa in terms of technology, and women have been a huge beneficiary. And so we're seeing mobile technology, for example, in our programs, used to enable them to implement payment mechanisms that, matches what I said. Women need flexibility. They need to be at home to be a mother, and they need to run a business. When you have mobile technology being used to enable her, for example, for payment, to accept cash and return change, she may not necessarily have to move and go into banking malls, which are structured for a different kind of society that she's not yet there for. So technology does play a big role, but again, we have to be practical within the means that the women live in.
So, Chiara, just taking up from what Dorcas has said, is the EU looking at the digital, the mobile telephony, etc., as an empowerment tool for women in Africa?
Indeed, digitalization is still an untapped area where we really need to mainstream gender in terms of job and growth, but also empowerment of women. When I was listening to her, I was thinking about a smaller scale project, but an interesting one in this discussion, which is called I Know Politics, because there was a question about building women's networks.
Yeah.
And I do believe that it is extremely important. Through this project, we are linking together in 190 countries around the world women who are ready to step up in politics and public engagement, and providing them tools, ICT tools to go about it. Because yes, of course, the digital brings a lot of opportunities, but as you know, and she was mentioning, there is also a lot of fear, harassment, and violence, particularly for women who enters into the public sphere and politics. So we also need to tailor our interventions in order to take care of that.
So, Kamisa, you are Minister for the Digital Economy. What are you doing in your field, especially for empowering women, bringing more women into the sector, but also reaching out to those perhaps who are not readily contactable?
Mm-hmm. So we work very closely with startups in Mali, and what we currently are setting up is a special program for women startups, and we're encouraging them to use ICTs in order to make sure that they reach the largest customers possible. So there is definitely, I would say, a movement being created, but through startups, and ICTs is definitely the way to go. But listening to my neighbor here talking about ICT, the use of new technologies, we have to remember that the world of ICT and new technologies, or the internet, is not a separate world. It's not a world that's different from the current world, and the inequalities that we see in our daily lives are mirrored in the digital world. So what we need to do is really focus on the basics, and I believe education is one of them. The more women you'll have educated, and I think one of the participants mentioned it, that when women are educated, their children will most likely steer away from activities, shady activities, let me put it this way. So it's really important to go back to the basics. I believe that ICTs is quite important. We have more and more youth being interested and using ICTs. Sometimes they don't know how to use it, or they have no clue about the opportunities that ICTs could offer. So I believe that we really need to go back to our basics and remind ourselves that the digital world is not a panacea where all of our problems disappear.
So we're going to be talking about the digital world and skills and talents that are required in our second session this evening. But I just wanted to ask you, the fact that you're the Minister for the Digital Economy, that sends a message as well, doesn't it? And do many governments in Africa have a minister for this sector?
Actually, the Ministry of Digital Economy in Mali is the one that has known the most women, and I have many other women counterparts. So I think that it is sending, yes, a message, but I would say that my previous position, me being a woman and a young woman in my previous position, sent a very strong message.
Minister of Foreign Affairs?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And the slew of media attacks that I experienced in that position was just insane, I have to say it. So I believe that digital economy is still important. It's an important aspect, and I hope that we'll see more and more women
and just very quickly, you said there are many counterparts, female counterparts in your sector. So what do you talk about when you meet together? Are you setting agendas for the African Union per se, or is it within the region? I
think all of them in their own countries are making a lot of strides and progress. They're very, very dynamic. The good thing is that most of them have remained in their positions for 2 or 3 years. So they've been able to design projects, implement them, evaluate them, recalibrate their different options. So I think that there is so much to be done in the digital world, especially on the African continent, that we need more and more people. It doesn't matter actually whether they're women or not. Exactly. If they're women, it's even better. But we really need, and I think we've understood that the future of our countries does rely on a digital economy. And you will also notice that the name or the title of my ministry is Digital Economy and Planning. So in the planning that we're doing for Mali, for example, for the next 10 years, digital economy is at the center of it, because we know that the future is digital.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. So Elizabeth, I was keeping that question on populism and the pushback against women's empowerment that is happening actually across the world, in Africa, Asia, and in Europe. So some of your comments?
First, if I may, Shada, on digital, it's absolutely crucial, because in our programs, our 42 countries where the Annalene Foundation is present, we really use the digital tool more and more.
Right.
For example, the Commission has asked the Foundation, to be one of the main partners of the Erasmus Plus virtual program, where we have regularly on the net dialogue between young Africans men and women, and young Europeans. And for example, when you have a dialogue between the young Mauritanian far away in the Sahara and a young Danish or Finnish citizen,
It's amazing.
it's always very interesting in itself. And I observe that young women and young girls are very much at ease with the digital tool. My granddaughters, 2 years old, they know better than I do sometimes how to use that already. Something. So it's a tool for gender equality. I'm very sure of that. And the second remark I would make is that when we have a cross intercultural dialogue, using especially the digital tool, then immediately you find discussions on exchanges on bad experiences and good practice. And this is, of course, absolutely crucial, because when you have these exchanges between different countries and different ages, and then it's just a matter for hope in the future. And I think that there is no better tool than this one. Now, of course, the digital tool enlarges considerably the possibilities that we have, both in the networks, in the NGO networks, and in government
Right.
and parliamentary actions. And my last word would be to say that when we have cross working between government, parliament, administration, companies, and NGOs on the ground, then this produces the best.
Yeah. Okay. I'll come back to you later on the other question, but I want to take some more questions from the floor. So I have 2, 3, 4 questions. Okay. So let's start with the lady over there. Yes. And I'll come to you. And 2 at the back.
Hello, my name is Celine Mias, and I work for Care International. It's a global humanitarian and development organization working in 90 countries across the world with a specific focus on women and girls. I think this is a really important topic, as you can imagine, and would like to congratulate all of the speakers for the work that you're doing to promote women in governance, in governments, and also in value chains. It's essential. One thing that's missing for me, however, from this discussion, it's been alluded to a few times, but hasn't been directly addressed, is the role of women in civil society. And we know that women in civil society are very active in Africa and throughout the world, but are often not given a voice. So my question is really, how can you all, in your roles, and how can we promote the work of women in civil society?
Thank you very much for that question. I didn't raise it because I want the participants to also bring questions to the floor, which is exactly what you've done. So thank you very much for that. The lady over here, please. Just put up your hand, please. Just put up your hand, yeah.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jamtine Jacobi, and I'm working for UNAIDS, still currently in Kenya, and soon coming to Brussels. Now, my question is related to gender-based violence, sexual and gender-based violence, and SRHR. Actually, in my field of work, the AIDS world, we see that it is very much undermining responses and, in a sense, hindering progress of women. So I was thinking or wondering whether any of you is working on it to also reduce the barriers, to address the barriers to women's empowerment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me take questions at the back. Elena, yes, please.
Hi, I'm Valerie Ndaruzanie from Global Water Institute. Well, my question goes to the Minister of Digital Economy in Mali. I'm not sure, probably I'm going to step away from women issues, but I'm very much interested in learning how you, your minister or your government, do correlate its work with French troops fighting Boko Haram, and how are you sure that there is no leaking information going to the terrorism and so on?
Thank you very much for that. There was another hand that was up at the back. Yes, please. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Maureen. I'm a member of the Irish Parliament and the Foreign Affairs Committee in the Irish Parliament. Looking at the results from the survey about raising awareness to tackle patriarchal and cultural norms and also affirmative action, I mean, there was a major response to those. I'm asking, do you consider that there's also a need for a particular module within that for people with a disability? Because they face so many other challenges and difficulties, particularly women with a disability. And I sometimes think that they are the forgotten part when it comes to women's issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll go back to the panel unless there's someone else who wants to. Oh, yeah, all right, please. Yes, someone does want to come in. Good. Yes.
Thank you. Frédéric Roeder, I'm EU and France Director at the One Campaign. I was struck by something that the minister said, that all African countries actually have policies on gender equality, but implementation is the problem. And I think we can probably say the same for other countries in the world outside Africa. Even if, I mean, if we take a step back even further, I think we can say that over the last 2 years, we've never discussed gender equality as much as we're doing it now. But progress is still very, very slow. So I think it's the World Economic Forum that said that on average it will take us 108 years.
Yes.
And I was wondering whether an example of a success story from another sector might actually help make progress and fast-track progress on gender equality. And this is the Open Government Partnership that really had an impact, I believe, on open government, fighting corruption, transparency, which set up a global mechanism allowing for political momentum for governments actually to step forward and agree on forward-looking action plans, and at the same time setting up a mechanism at the country level which allows civil society to come in to hold governments accountable, to have independent experts actually monitoring whether progress happens.
Right.
So I was wondering whether something like this could actually help us move forward on gender equality actually at large, but more specifically in the peace sector, but also digital economy.
Thank you very much. I've got 2 more questions coming in, and if they're brief and 3 actually, brief and to the point, I will indeed take them. So Virginia first, just keep your hand up.
I'm Virginia Mucchi from the European Centre for Development Policy Management. One question I have is that we've been talking about gender equality a lot, and I can see that, but empowerment for me is actually much more important, because the key element here is actually putting women in the position to succeed. Mm-hmm. And there is one element, Shad, I disagree with you when you say in times of crisis that we look for a strong man. These days we're not. We're looking for women in times of crisis, because we think they will sort it out.
Sure.
And then what is called the famous glass cliff.
Yeah.
So they collapse once the crisis is so big that they cannot actually deal with it. So what I'm wondering is, do you see this phenomenon, especially in politics, because this is one key element, and should we also measure that in terms of empowerment? Thanks.
Thank you very much. Take the microphone at the back there, please. Yes.
James Mackey, sorry, I'm a colleague of Virginia who's just spoken at ECDPM. I want to ask our 2 African panelists, given that we're in Brussels here and we tend to be very oriented on policy towards the European institutions, whether you could give us some sense of how you view the African institutions, the continental institutions, in terms of promoting gender equality on the continent. And supplementary to that is then what sort of advice would you be giving the European institutions, notably the representatives from the European Commission, as to how they should engage with the African Union institutions on gender equality? Are there any particular words of advice on that? Thank you.
Thank you, James. And finally, Yusuf here. Raoul, thank you.
Thank you. I'm Yusuf Ali. I'm a startupper, founder and CEO of Kuranjabo, a social startup that providing energy for low-income individuals in Chad. My question is, in the business idea, I address to the panels. For example, I know that as an entrepreneur working a lot with group of also young ladies and women who are creating the startup, and they're very good at it. And they're struggling with the funding, you know, they're struggling with funding issues. So if there's any program that Coca-Cola providing, like, you know, a funding program that's for young ladies and women, and to empower them to successfully, like, you know, scale their business through entrepreneurship. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So many questions, different themes, different topics. I urge the panelists to take up 1 or 2 or 3 topics, not try and answer each and every query that has been put to you. So I would like to start with you, Dorcas.
Maybe I'll start from you. Yes, indeed. What 5x20, the program I talked about, aims to do is remove the 3 barriers that most hold women back from entrepreneurship. Access to skills, access to finance, and networking. As we said, women do things in groups. In terms of access to finance, what we do as a company generally with all our empowerment programs is we do things around where we can make the biggest impact. We have a value chain that can enable women to be economically empowered. However, we partner with organizations such as the Women Enterprise Fund in Kenya that provides women with loans. And when we bring the 2 activities together, it's a 360-degree empowerment and enablement initiative for women. Depending on the country you're talking about, there may be such opportunities, or if there are none, there may be an opportunity to look at the model and try it in a different country.
Would you like to take up also the question about what advice would you give your African institutions about how to deal with these issues, Europe and Africa working together?
Yes, you know, as a corporate, you typically talk about what you do best. My experience from 5x20 in terms of where I've had failure and learned is where we were not practical. What I would say is that there's a lot of policy globally being shaped to enable women. It's important that they are women-informed, women-led, so that they are practical, especially for the rural women, as you said. Very little data exists about who they are and how they live their lives. So often we find solutions that are very well-intentioned but irrelevant in the day-to-day life. So to be informed from bottom up is my advice for any institution, and we've taken the advice ourselves.
And there were other two questions that I think might be useful for you to answer. One was about civil society, and if you're doing anything to actually bring more visibility and power to women in civil society in Africa. And there was one about disabilities as well, women with disabilities. I don't know if you have any information about what's happening there in terms of Africa.
So typically for the programs that I manage is we do not discriminate. The only time we make a distinction is because we are promoting women, 70% have to be women, but we recognize that to empower a woman, sometimes you have to also empower the men. Now, what I would say is that I think that there is a responsibility amongst us women who've had the opportunity to be enabled to uplift others. And I know that majority of people working in civil society are women. So I think this is one instance where I'm calling on us women to do the right thing. I think that there's a lot that we can ask men and institutions, but where we are playing the largest role, I think it's upon us to understand what is it that's a barrier where women are succeeding to make sure that they get to the next level. Having said that, we do have a program in Tanzania that specifically targets disabled women. And I think there, when I talk about being practical in economically enabling women, it's about being flexible. The determination and the creativity in women and the need for economic enablement is across, whether you're disabled or not. However, to increase the chances for a disabled woman to succeed, it means you have to go the extra mile. And what does this mean? It means when you're programming as a corporate or an NGO, program with some adaptability and flexibility. Usually we all worry about costs. There are instances when you stop worrying about the typical metrics to make sure that women who have exceptional circumstances such as disability are truly included. So it's about being inclusive by being adaptable, in my opinion.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Chiara, would you like to come in, please?
Thanks. I think I'll take the question on sexual and gender-based violence, which was clearly flagged. Well, if you think of it, this is a global issue which is common to Europe, Africa, let alone Pacific and Asia. We are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 here. So in average, 1 in 3 women in her lifetime is subject to violence. So one of us.
Including on the social media?
Including in social media, but yes,
Just
and
physical
all
attacks.
sorts of physical attacks. This is, of course, a main issue to tackle, a main priority, otherwise what we are talking about. I would bring you back to what I mentioned before as an example, the EU-UN partnership on eliminating all forms of violence against women and girls, so-called Spotlight Initiative, because I think it has the potential to be transformational in the sense that it's about pushing proactively and working in partnership with government, civil society and all actors to change the laws, but it's also about implementation, training judges, training police, work on gender stereotypes, and really use and work with women's movements locally, community leaders locally, to be part of this solution. So, as I said, in Africa, it's about mainly tackling harmful practices, but it's also about femicide in Latin America, family violence in
Who does that on behalf of the European Union? Who actually engages? Local delegations?
Yeah, we are engaging at country level. We are engaging EU delegations, the UN agencies who are best placed to help there, with the civil societies and governments, and they all sit in national steering reference groups to build the programs together. So that, I think, is already a big change. And in terms of the role of civil society in the spotlight, the civil society sits at the table in the civil society reference.
Who monitors progress being made? Is it civil society that keeps an eye?
There will be a big role for civil society, and that comes to your next question. Indeed, as EU, we do have a number of programs and initiatives to make sure that civil society can perform its role, that has an enabling environment, that can keep governments accountable. I just think as one current example is the program I'm responsible for, which is called European IDHR, European Instruments for Democracy and Human Rights, where in fact the main target is civil society organizations, 80% of it or 90% of it. And one aspect of that is protecting and empowering women, human rights defenders who are particularly under attack.
Thank you very much. Elizabeth, would you like to come in?
Well, 2 comments maybe. The first one is that women have play a crucial role as far as peacekeeping or is concerned. I have one very example, since we had someone talking about Ireland. I remember when I was a European MP some years ago, that the main supporters in the European Parliament for peace between the 2 islands were really women MPs. Of course, the political process was crucial, of course. And the fact that both Northern Ireland, part of the UK, and Southern Ireland were part of the European Union was absolutely determinant in this peace process. But the support of women MPs everywhere was absolutely, predominant. And the second example is that, second comment I want to make is that gender equality is an endless fight. Of course, a lot of progress have been made. Fortunately, the sexist attitudes, especially in politics, but everywhere, are less accepted by society than when I was young, for example. But it's an endless fight because it's a cultural fight, and I think that in this fight, when women need to be supported by men, because more and more men are convinced that a good society has to take into account that half of the humanity are women. And that for societies to be human, well, they need to take into account half of that humanity. And the best example I have in mind is the fight that was led by Tunisian women when the parliament and everyone was reflecting about reforming the constitution, and there was an attempt from some political parties, to write in the constitution that women were inferior to men, and it's the mobilization in the civil society of women with the help of a lot of men that really made that the Tunisian constitution, of course, is dedicated also to gender equality.
Very right. Thank you very much, Lisbeth, for bringing that up as well. So, Camisa, let's turn to you now.
Maybe I would like to touch on the question regarding the continental institution or the African Union. I believe that the African Union has paid a lot of attention to gender equality, gender balance in governance over the past 10 years.
Has or has not? Sorry.
Has.
Mm-hmm.
Has. But we need to keep in mind that ultimately it's the individual African countries that will have to either accept, implement, and include gender balance and gender equality in the way they conduct business. So again, we do have those beautiful gender equality policies, gender quotas that need to be implemented. The good thing is that the AU has the clout to make sure that gender questions are not an afterthought anymore. So I have very good faith in what the AU can do if they actually want to push the gender agenda forward. In terms of advice, I don't think that I have any specific advice to give to the European Union, but you also have to remember that any positive gender policy that will be implemented by the EU can inspire an institution like the African Union. So a word of encouragement for the European Union.
Thank you very much. So if we have more women in EU in EU leadership positions, it's kind of contagious, right? It's a good contagion. It goes from one continent to the other and then back here again. So I'd like to bring this session to an end. Thank you so much, all four of you, for bringing your very, very valuable insights into the discussion, but also to all the questions you put. So I'm not going to wrap up. There will be an event report that my colleagues will put on the website soon, but I just wanted to say, I started off by saying we're living in an important time in the sense that our leadership here in Europe is going to change. And one of the things that we really wanted to showcase in this conference is how Africa is changing, and that old-fashioned, outdated groupthink on Africa really needs to be put aside, and a more realistic view of what's really happening, the good, the bad, but the positive and the negative, but to look at both sides. And I have to say that you have really helped, all four of you, to bring that to the table. I think, Elizabeth, you really put it perfectly when you said it is an endless fight. I think our daughters, our granddaughters will continue the fight. But it is heartening, really, isn't it, reassuring to see that the momentum is building and that the younger women will not put up with the kind of sticky floors or the glass ceilings that we referred to. So it's becoming more and more difficult here in Brussels to have any conference which doesn't have parity on its panel, so that's a very good step. And today we went one step forward and we have an all-female panel. So guys, don't start sending social media tweets saying no man on the panel. We tried, but you know, guys, unpredictable, they change their minds all the time, they get busy, so two dropped out. But I am very, very grateful to the four who stayed and made this such an important conference. Thank you. Anyway, we're starting again at 5 o'clock, and there's tea and coffee upstairs, so you have a break now. Thank you. So welcome back, everyone. I hope you networked, talked to each other, made all the important discussions you needed to engage in at this time. And we're back because we're going to take this conversation forward. So the numbers are really quite striking. And, you know, Africa is an old and ancient continent with an ancient and old culture and traditions, but it's also a very young continent. When you read all the documents, 60% of Africa's youth population is under the age of 25. And it's interesting that the African Union's Youth Charter claims that youth is Africa's biggest resource. But to actually make use of that resource in a constructive, positive manner and productive manner, you actually need to have the skills and the talent and the educational necessities to actually take that conversation forward. So in keeping with our image today, bringing forward from Africa some of the biggest talents, the young leaders, the young business leaders, entrepreneurs who are changing the face of Africa from within, and to change our narrative in Europe, which tends to be rather old-fashioned and groupthink about what Africa needs from Europe, not the other way around, what we need from Africa, how we can interact. So young talent here are some formidable panelists who have really created interesting organizations from scratch sometimes and are really moving forward. So let me introduce you to them very, very briefly. We have with us Mr. Samir Abdul Karim. He is author, entrepreneur, founder of Emerging Valley, which is seeking to become the digital hub in that area in France, which is Aix, Marseille, and Provence. So Samir, thank you very much for coming here. Also our pleasure to have Sabine Müller. She's Director General of the Africa Department of the GIZ, so the German Development Agency. Thank you very much for coming, Sabine. Also a great pleasure to have with us Ali Yusuf, who is, let me get this straight, founder and chief executive of Kuran Jabo from Chad. You ran one of the master classes up there, so some of you have already heard him. He's going to talk to us about his solar power project. Also with us is Jonas Maru from Nairobi. He is founder and managing director of Bandwidth and Cloud Services. From Nairobi, Jonas, thank you very much for being here as well. And grateful to the European Investment Bank for actually signaling to us how interesting a person, entrepreneur you are. And last but not least, I have with us Ife Inwa, excuse me, Ife Inwa. I said it right? Okay, Ugo Chukubu. And she is CEO of the Tony Elumelu Foundation, based in Lagos. Of course, a foundation that's doing a lot of work for the development of Africa as well. So actually, once again, rules of the game are the same. I'm going to ask a few questions, get their comments, and please keep your thinking caps on, because a lot of the questions will come from you, comments as well. And I will open the floor as soon as I can. So I'm actually going to start with you, Efevina, if I may. So, you know, we talk a lot about all the, demographic, positive demographic growth, young people, talent, skills. Are African governments doing enough to actually channel these skills into the digital economy?
Thank you so much, Shada, for that question. Just to give a bit of background on the foundation, the Tony Elumelu Foundation, founded in 2010. And in 2015, after several different initiatives and interventions, we decided to zero in and focus entirely on empowering entrepreneurs across Africa. And so in 2015, our founder, Mr. Tony Elumelu, launched a $100 million commitment to identify, train, mentor, and fund 10,000 African entrepreneurs over 10 years. To date, we have trained and funded and mentored 7,520 entrepreneurs. So we're 5 years in now. And when we started the program, a lot of people felt, this is quite ambitious of you. Where are you going to find 10,000 entrepreneurs? What they didn't bank on was the fact that we would be leveraging technology. So in the first year, we had just over 20,000 applications, because everything about the program is online. The applications are online. The portal opens January 1, closes March 1, all online. The training is online. Fast forward to 2019, this year, between January 1 and March 1, we received 216,000 applications to the program. So with our commitment to select 1,000 every year, we take them through a proprietary 12-week online training program. And then at the end of the training program, they have developed a business plan, which is certified by Accenture, and then they get their $5,000 seed capital. So every year, the foundation pays out $5 million to 1,000 entrepreneurs. But with 216,000 applications, we realized that we were not even scratching the surface. The demand is huge. Africans across all 54 African countries, young, bright minds are looking to translate their ideas into reality. And they just don't have friends or family that they can go to for the seed capital that they need. And we realized that capacity building and funding are two sides of the same coin. And the governments are there to create an enabling environment. They're there to ensure that there's security and stability. But the governments will not create jobs, and the governments are not there to create entrepreneurs. That is the role of the private sector. So in terms of what the government is contributing, I think that African governments all over Africa are completely committed to ensuring that the young population have what they need in terms of jobs and entrepreneurship empowerment. But they can't do it alone. They need private sector involvement, and that is where foundations like ours come in. And they need collaboration from the development agencies and our foreign partners. And that is why this year, for the first time, last year we opened the partnership, the program up to partnerships, and GIZ was one of the first partners that we had in addition to ICRC. So last year we selected 1,400 as opposed to 1,000. This year we selected 3,050 entrepreneurs who were trained and funded under the program. And we had governments like the government of Botswana, the government of Benin Republic, who decided to empower additional entrepreneurs onto the program that we do. So what we find is that the governments will create the enabling environment, but what entrepreneurs need is training. What entrepreneurs need is seed capital funding. And Africa, unfortunately, is one place where there are not that many people who have friends or family they can go to lend them the $5,000 they need for seed capital. Banks will not look at you because it's too little, and equity companies, it's just too much risk. So we're playing at the bottom of the pyramid, and we believe that this is where the most need lies in Africa. The whole idea is give them that foot in the door, help them start their entrepreneurial journey, and then by the time they work their way up the pyramid, they would then be able to be attractive to banks and to venture capitalist organizations. And we're looking at taking entrepreneurs in Africa from startup to IPO. That's the plan. And hopefully I'll have a little bit more time to give you more information about how much impact these entrepreneurs are having, again, because they're leveraging technology.
So just a very quick follow-up into... Thank you. Just a very quick follow-up in terms of what happens next. So once you've got this wide network, do you monitor what happens to them? And what are the sort of challenges, very quickly, that you have to face when you're reaching out to them, nurturing them, preparing them to take on the reins of entrepreneurship?
In terms of challenges, I think that one of the major challenges we had in the beginning was in terms of women participation. We found that the first 2 years we had about 20% women participation, especially in North Africa, where there are religious and cultural barriers to women going into entrepreneurship. And so we decided consciously to have a communication campaign that showed that you can be a woman, you can actually have your cultural and religious values maintained while being an entrepreneur. And we showcased a lot of our female entrepreneurs who were doing just that. And so this year, we had 45% female participation. In terms of challenges, I think that, like I said, in this development sector, there's no such thing as competition, there's collaboration. And we each have strengths, and we each have to leverage strengths and the expertise of each player and each stakeholder in the ecosystem to ensure that the entrepreneurs are getting what they need. And that is why last year, in 2018, October, we launched tefconnect.com, which is built to be the largest digital online platform for African entrepreneurs. And the plan is to bring together the entire entrepreneurship ecosystem in Africa in one place online. To date, we have already 550,000 subscribers to this platform. We want to build it to be the Alibaba or the Facebook for entrepreneurship in Africa. And what we find is that the global community feel that, you know, there's not enough data or information around entrepreneurship in Africa, and we want to solve that problem. Data is key, and that is why we have this platform to ensure that entrepreneurs are able to interact with each other, network with each other, showcase their business and their services to the world. We have a marketplace on that platform as well. And technology is really the way to disrupt development, disrupt the way that we engage with Africa, and to show that Africa right now needs not a handout, but a hand up. And that is the key, leveraging technology. There will be sustainable development.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed. So, very strong points made. Jonas, I wanted to ask from your perspective, also working in the digital field, working in telecoms. What Efendwe said was we don't need handouts, we need a hand up. And I was wondering, can Europe and Africa provide that kind of collaboration in your sector to, you know, leapfrog further, if you like?
Yes, no, absolutely. Let me just take a moment to introduce our organization. BCS Group operates across Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, Zambia, and Congo. And we're wholesalers of bandwidth services to mobile operators and ISPs. So we give them wholesale internet. We have shareholding in some of the submarine cables. And then we connect cities and cell phone towers on fiber, either as a contractor or we own it and lease it to them, or kind of a hybrid co-build model. And we provide fiber construction services, and we're basically extending our fiber lines into more and more remote parts of Africa. That's what we do. I think in terms of the collaboration between Europe and Africa.
Before we go there, can I just ask you of the challenges you face in your sector before we go to the collaboration? You're doing this operation of, you know, spreading out your...
There's quite a number of challenges, and it depends on the specific area that we are talking about. On the product side, one of the challenges we really face is that we never get a view into the R&D pipeline. So a lot of the purchasing and deployment in the telco sector in Africa is vendor-driven. You choose to buy something because there's a vendor in front of you pitching a particular solution or a particular product line, but you'd never really kind of get a very clear idea about what is in the pipeline, in the research and development pipeline and new technologies 2 years down the line, 5 years down the line, 7 years down the line. So, and sort of fashioning your business strategy around that. So that's one challenge. For us particularly right now, we have plenty of sort of large contracts of customers. We have plenty of funding, and we're growing up from being an entrepreneurial environment, and we have to scale up our people and have formal structures and processes. So I'm really trying to call friends in Silicon Valley right now to understand how they go from 40 people to 400 people in like 6 months. So the structures around that is quite a bit. And especially because me, myself, I've never really worked for a big company. So it's just I'm learning on the job. The other challenge we face is, as we're growing, kind of related to the growth, is the trade-off between growth and efficiency of cost and time. So the more efficient you are in your particular cost, the quicker you want to deploy, the less you can do, right? And I think that's a straight trade-off. So finding the appropriate balance to say, okay, what is it, and moving that balance and that pin as you grow based on your growth scales. So I think those are
right. And the governments are providing you with the kind of enabling climate for investments, finance, cross-border interactions.
Generally, yes. We're grateful that we're in business to begin with, because telco was a government-owned monopoly even in Britain until like just, what is it, 27 years ago or so, right? So the fact that we're even in this business and able to be so, I mean, is an example of them providing us an enabling environment. I mean, I would say that the one notable exception would be definitely the Congo, which is a very, very difficult environment to execute in, and one that is very kind of disjointed from the central government. So it's almost as you go from one town to another, it's like you're entering new countries, new territories, have to, and everyone who can stop your job will go out of the way to stop their job. Aside from that, probably something that governments have not thought too much about in the telco sector is the decoupling the licensing with the ownership. So I think both for us and for the sector, one of the most important changes they can make in the regulatory sphere is to decouple the ownership versus the service provisioning. Because for the financiers in the sector, they need security over the assets. So for them to have security over the assets, then that means that they need to be able to own the assets. But they're not a licensed operator to be able to own. The issues around ownership and funding are also for cross-border transactions. So there might be operators in a neighboring country that want to fund a telco infrastructure in the neighboring country for the purpose of transit, right? To be able to not to provide service in that neighboring country, but to be able to transit through, but don't necessarily have an interest in that. So even for those operators, decoupling the ownership such that you don't have to be a licensed telco operator to own, and you only have to be licensed to operate and provide service would be something that'd be very useful.
Okay, so there are some lessons perhaps that Europe and Africa can share on that, regulatory frameworks.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it can definitely start with providing and giving the Africa Union more powers along the framework of the...
competition powers like the European Commission has?
Yeah, competition powers, but also regulatory powers, basically. Yeah, to take some of the telco that is within the domain of the national regulators and put that at the AU, and at the AU level, that would simplify life for a lot of operators. The other thing that is a very good for us, I think, within Africa to learn from Europe would be how you create private sector monopolies who provide their services affordably and are very efficient in providing it. And the electricity sector comes in mind. I don't know the electricity sector in Europe very well, but I know the one in the US, if I just assume kind of it's similar, is like, how do you create, because especially in the US environment, like they're private companies, they're basically monopolies, but they provide really cheap prices and they provide excellent service. So that is obviously driven by the type of regulatory framework you have. So we could really learn a lot from that, because there's certain sectors like electricity, and even to some extent, even the telco fiber infrastructure, that it makes sense to be sort of, you know, a quasi-monopoly or a region-specific monopoly.
Thank you very much. Yeah, and I think that will come in later on when I bring a question of the African free trade, continental free trade area, where this will be one of the issues, I imagine. So Samir, let me turn to you now. As I said, you're an author, and I think you have a copy of your book that you could show our participants here, but also in terms of the partnerships that you're working on with the European Union, please.
Thank you very much. Just to start, just to give you an idea of the difficulty and what's remained to be done, two of the speakers who should have been here today from Libya and from South Africa, who are very well connected, successful startups, entrepreneurs, they are not here because they didn't get on time the visa. So it gives an idea of what still remains to be done if we want to connect and get more closer our digital ecosystem between Europe and Africa. So just to give you a background, so my name is Sami Abdelkrim. I am an entrepreneur, an author, and for between 2014 and 2018, I have been traveling and writing and doing a research across 30 countries and tech ecosystem in Africa. I've wrote several hundreds of articles about African startups that I've met on the ground, such as Ali, for example, from Chad. And when I come back in Europe, so I wrote this book, Startup Alliance, which is now only in French, but it will be soon in English, with the foreword of Xavier Niel and Tidjane Dem. And also, I have created in my hometown, Marseille, because I think that this part of Europe is one of the most legitimate, historically, geographically, economically, to be the gate, the hub of innovation between Europe and the Mediterranean, and of course, Africa. So last year I created this platform, this event, Emerging Valley, and Ifinia was there also for the launch of several platforms, Digital Africa, the Tony Elumelu platform. And the idea was to source on the ground the African startups that are solving fundamental issues with technology in healthcare, in energy, in education, and to give them an opportunity to have the training with the highly qualified mentors and to meet investors, VCs, and be connected also with the GFIs and giving them the exposure so they can raise fund because this is the number one problem.
So how do you do it? You do seminars and conferences,
Yeah.
you bring people together, how do you do it?
So there is a one-week acceleration program organized by the Agence Française Développement, which is called the Social and Inclusive Business Camp, where the 60 African, but not just Sub-Saharan, also Mediterranean African, are gathered with experts, with, for example, high-level investor like experts from Investor and Partner, which is one of the leading investors in Sub-Saharan Africa. And we train them to giving them guidance, mentoring, how to pitch, and then they have a full day of meeting with investors during the summit Emerging Valley. So last year we had the first edition. It was a very intense, and this year we have this partnership with the European Commission because we want to. The European Commission with the DG Innovation and Research is launching the Africa-Europe Innovation Partnership. And the goal is to create some kind of community of this digital destiny between European ecosystem, African ecosystem, through the networking of incubators. So, so there will be a first event in Nairobi in September, where the incubators from European Union, especially the ones that have no opportunity to be connected with African and Mediterranean from Eastern Europe, etc., to be directly connected to the actors on the ground. And the second event will be Emerging Valley, where we will widen the networking activities. There will be a reinforcement of capacities, training, tech transfer, etc.
And is the idea to make them work together or to engage in just partnerships or actually work on joint projects?
Yes, the idea is to train, to make a share of best practices, and to generate a partnership. Soft lending, partnership, how to work together, etc. So, and the idea is because the tech hubs are one of the main entry points in an ecosystem. For example, one of the partner in Nigeria is the CC Hub, which is in Lagos. For me, it's one of the most inspirational tech hub in Nigeria. which was at the very beginning of the emergence of the Nigerian ecosystem, which is now valued more than $2 billion by Startup Genome. So we make them work together, and the idea is really about building partnership. It's not about Africa is the market for Europe. It's about being equal and to create shared value. It's not just about European ecosystem. It's also about African ecosystem, and it's giving the same chance for African. That's why I'm sad that the visa problem.
Yes, that is a problem.
To come in Europe, not just European incubators to come in Africa.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much. Just a very quick question. In terms of startup and how easy or not is it in Africa, I guess in Europe as well, to actually, we heard earlier about access to financing, about markets, fragmented markets, etc. How easy is it to have a startup? And there's a Startup Act, I think maybe Tunisia is leading the way in that?
I think the government has a huge role to play in the easing the life of entrepreneurs, and we have one. There is a gap, a lack of dialogue between ecosystem, government. It's very difficult to make them work together, and also between entrepreneurs and DFIs. But it's changing. For example, Partech Ventures, which is one of the biggest...
DFIs are the development institutions, so the World Bank, and we'll talk to GIZ in a minute also.
And one of the most important recent example is Partech Ventures, which is one of the leading investment funds in Europe, has launched the Partech Africa Fund, more than 100 million, and the main investor in this fund are the GFIs. And because they understand that now tech entrepreneurs are the missing link to impact and to improve and to solve fundamental issues on the ground.
Right.
It's not just about building only bridges and
it's the impact financing.
Yes, absolutely. And in Tunisia, they had a very interesting experience from the ground, a very organic experience where the government, the parliament, and the entrepreneurs, they have for 1 year a dialogue. How we can eliminate corruption, eliminate barriers, democratize access to finance. Because the one problem, the top problem in Tunisia is that the universities are training or producing one of the best engineers from Africa, and a lot of, I know, engineers from Chad, from Benin that go to Tunisia, to Morocco to get the training, and they leave their country. And in the end, Tunisia produces a lot of talents that doesn't stay in their own country, that train them. So the Startup Act was to completely create a new ecosystem, to give more opportunities, to help entrepreneurs to create their startups and to get funding so they can stay. And it's the beginning is quite successful, and now you have this phenomenon of replication of the Startup Act all across Africa, with the World Bank, for example, which is organizing policy hackathon in Mali, and the minister was there just previously, in Niger, in Senegal. So it's slightly evolving, but it has to be a dialogue between the governments and the entrepreneurs without filters.
Okay, thank you very much, Samir, for that. So there are the changes happening all the time, but it has to be in all of a society approach in a sense, not just top down. So Ali, Sabine, I'll come to you last because I want your comments on what you hear from our African partners. So Ali, for you, solar energy, also no energy, no development, obviously. So tell us a little bit about your project and what you're doing.
Thank you. Actually, Courant Jabo is a social startup for profit that we provide energy for low-income individuals who don't have access to energy. Why is that? Because Chad, has one of the, the rate is really low. The people that have access to electricity, only 6.5% of the population have access to electricity, which means that more than 90% of the population, they don't have access to energy. So what they are using, they are using candle or kerosene lamp or generator, which is really expensive. environmentally not good. There is important emission of CO2, and also it's not healthy for the people that were using that. For example, using kerosene or candle, can cause fire by accident, and this has happened a lot. And we saw there is opportunity, so we have learned this model from other African country like Nigeria, West African country, and also like Kenya. So we went there. We have seen what's going on there, and it's really there is real impact. There is real impact on the people. We talk to the customer who is using this product, how this changed your life, and we say that, okay, this is going to be also an opportunity in Chad, and it's going to change people's life. So we have started the venture, the startup, and then we have started deploying, the model. Of course, that there is adaptation. We need also to innovate in the way that, because the context is not the same. You can learn the big figure, but you have to be in the details that there is a lot of difference between countries. And of course that we need, we have worked on it. So for the pilot phase, we have helped more than 200 people to get access to electricity through solar panel for the first time. Most of them, they are sparing electricity for the first time. And we think that this model can work across Central Africa, because you can see just after Chad, the Sahelian countries, but also in Central Africa region, where the electricity is really, there is lack of electricity. And in Central Africa alone, there is 125 million persons are living without access to electricity. And this number is likely going to increase, because we are talking about demographic growth. In Chad alone, there is demand increasing by 10% each year. And we think that the government right now are using fuel, so 100% full use energy, and it's not reliable, the grid. So we need to think about a way to change that. So that's the reason that we have started Courant Jabo. And through that also we are learning a lot. So there is we need to innovate more. For example, to bring TV solution, but also to think about the cooking solution. Right now, people are using wood in the rural region, and even in the capital, for people to cook, they're struggling to find, for example, gas and or to find, for example, wood to cook with. So, and there is important emission that of CO2 when you're cooking. Also, we think that solar can be also an alternative, and we think that the energy market is really huge in Central Africa and even in Africa alone. And we think that there's a lot of things that we can do and we can innovate.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'm sure there'll be questions from the floor, so I'll just, about what your plans are as you grow bigger and more important. Sabine, let me come to you. So it's been mentioned often that organizations such as yours have a role to play in providing nurturing, training, but also financing for some of the projects that may appear not to be, very business friendly or have a direct impact. I was wondering if you could give us some of your ideas about how you proceed, how you judge.
Yes, thank you very much. Good afternoon. Hearing this, I would say Africa is already digital, and the digital revolution in Africa is right on the way. What you heard already, and we know also that about 50% of Africans now have mobile devices. That's a lot in a short time. And I think the use of mobile money is much more used, in Africa than in many European countries, I would say so. So there's a great development. There's a great demand for innovative solutions, we have heard. Agricultural apps and telemedicine and e-learning platforms and so on. And there's also an opportunity to make business with all that. But on the other hand, there are still challenges, because if you think about automation of production, for instance, this could also hamper job creation in Africa. I read about that, for instance, the cost using a robot in the US in 10 years will be lower than wages in Kenya. So there are just 10 years left now really to do something about it. So, and on the other hand, Africa is still benefiting less from internet penetration, for instance, than other countries. If we are doubling the access to internet in Africa, the increase of labor productivity is about 3%, and elsewhere else it's 11%. So there's a difference. And why is this the case? There are questions regarding infrastructure, broadband access, the costs of downloading 500 megabytes is much higher in Africa than in many other countries. So that's difficult. And then you have the whole skill issue, because what we learned, that we have excellency in Africa. We have all these startups. We have a very lively startup scene. But on the other hand, I think we need also broader basis, not only the experts, but also digital literacy on a broader level. So this starts with education, quality of education. And this has to do with the subjects you are teaching regarding more science, more mathematics, analytical skills, and so on. It has to do with the way you teach. If it's more frontal education where people have to memorize what teachers are presenting, or if they work in groups and labs and train their analytical skills. So, but that needs resources also, that needs qualified teachers and so on, so there's a lot to do. And then I think also regarding skills which are labor market oriented, so the technical and vocational education comes in. And there also the private sector comes in, because this works only in a close cooperation between the government and the private sector. And I think that's very important also to provide internship, etc., so that really you have a whole bunch of different skills people need really to make good use of all these opportunities that digitalization offers for Africa.
So do you think that a kind of Erasmus in Africa would be a way forward, which would focus really on the digital economy? Student exchanges, university exchanges, etc.?
I think this is a good idea. I heard that there is already a kind of virtual Erasmus, also EU-Africa. And I think this is also important to have this within Africa. But therefore you need also to have an acceptance of formal qualification, that the diploma are recognized mutually, etc., to make this happen. But I would also think a little bit more basic skills, because people have to be able to read. They might need language skills, because the internet is mostly in English. It's also this kind of core skills you need.
Right, thank you very much indeed. So we've heard 5 different points of view, some of the challenges, but also the vast opportunities opening up in Africa. And especially, I would imagine, as the free trade area grows and becomes a reality, I imagine that this would create more opportunities for consumers and business leaders as well. Very happy now to turn the floor to you, turn the microphone to you. Once again, if you stay to the point and make a comment, that's fine with me as well, but please just don't take too long, because I want to go back to our panel and also get everyone involved. So can I ask, this time I'm not going to say boy or girl, everyone is welcome to come in. So please, don't hesitate. Yes, yes. Please, here, just keep your hand up. Xavier, at some point I'd like you to come in as well, Xavier Prat. Yes, and Geert, I'd like you to come in as well, because you've been working quite a lot with startups as well in Africa. So let's kick off with the lady here. Yeah. Who is it? No, you have it. Sorry, please, voice first.
Hi there. I'm Adrian Camacho Fielding from a company called Concerto. We're a political and regulatory advisory focused on sub-Saharan Africa. My question is for Ifeinwa. First of all, do you focus on SMEs as well as startups? And then whichever your answer, do you have some sort of magical proprietary research database which you, if shared with others, could open all these doors? Because what I'm hearing from all these seed funds and VCs is that there are not enough bankable and not enough mature people out there. And how are you finding all of these people?
Go ahead, yeah. Yes, they work, just talk.
Okay, so I think that you've just hit on a crucial problem that Africa is facing. And we started this program primarily because we found that the VCs were recycling the same companies. If you're not pushing people up from the bottom of the pyramid, how are you going to get people starting the entrepreneurial journey and then going on to be IPOs? And so in terms of do we focus on SMEs, We are not particular about whether it's a startup or an SME. All we say is it can't be a business over 3 years old. So even if it's an idea, you can apply, but you can't be over 3 years old, because we feel that people at the bottom of the pyramid need the opportunity to start the entrepreneurial journey. Now, in terms of a database, absolutely, we have our finger on the pulse. We're in a research partnership with Stanford University, and they're basically working with our data set to analyze and gain insights. And I think that advocacy and is a critical part of the ecosystem in Africa. We've just heard now of the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, which recently was, it came into force on May 30th. And it's a brilliant idea. It shows that the will of the African governments are where it should be, which is to create a free trade area and to catalyze economic activity. But the reality on the ground is that Africa is still a fragmented market. Yeah. The reality on the ground is that, for instance, Q4 2018, Ghana needed over 4,000 metric tons of coal for a new plant they were starting. Nigeria had 10 times that amount. Nigeria is a vast resource of coal, but there was no way to get it from Nigeria to Ghana. Mm. And I dare say that even if this free trade agreement is in place, that will not change, because all the ships that come to Nigeria on a daily basis go straight back to Europe or America or wherever they came from. So if there are no ships, if there are no railroads, if there's no transportation, how do you trade? And that is where we need to focus in terms of private sector investments into Africa. African governments need to create an enabling environment. They need to create foreign investment climate so that these infrastructure can be created. And I think it lies not just with the SMEs, but with the foreign organizations as well. So in terms of investable businesses, they do exist. We are finding that what we're creating is a pipeline of investable companies into the African entrepreneurship ecosystem. We have entrepreneurs talking about monitoring and evaluation. Our entrepreneurs have gone on to do amazing things. We have an entrepreneur who was in agriculture, and leveraging technology, he came up with drone technology that helps farmers monitor their crops. Today, he's in Singapore, because the Singaporean government signed him up with a 5-year deal to bring his technology to Singapore. Not good for us, we want it in Africa, but that just shows that if you give them a hand up, there is so much talent and so much opportunity latent in Africa, and it is working together as a strong ecosystem that we can mine these opportunities.
Mm. Thank you very much indeed. The lady at the back, yes, please.
Yes, Maike Koldewey from GIZ, and I would like to follow up on what Ms. Müller said about digitalization being a huge chance for Africa. At the same time, though, from my own experience, having worked in Ghana and seeing how situation is on the ground, and in many schools, there's a quite traditional way of teaching in the first place, and not even quite far from having the digital gadgets actually in the hand of children to be able to learn. And that also at university, I made the experience that a lot of my fellow African colleagues at university had problems with really catching up on working with laptops and all of these things because they didn't own a laptop before. So taking that into consideration, I would like to ask a practical question to maybe also the startups. How you think how the private sector also can kind of tackle this problem, or fill the gap of how can you actually supply people with the energy and also, of course, the gadgets to even learn early on and then be able to close this gap and be part of this digital chance.
Thank you very much. I'll come to you in a minute, but let me take a few other questions. So Xavier Pat from Teach for All, formerly the European Commission.
Yes, hello. I work for Teach for All, which is a global network of organizations which devote themselves to education. And I wanted to make the following point. I think it's very important, as it's been put very eloquently, to have to promote and give opportunities to entrepreneurs and to use technology and digitalization. But if we want to help a continent with so many young people, we must make sure that they get the right education. And it seems to me that not enough attention is given to this issue. In most countries of sub-Saharan Africa, you have a huge deficit of competent teachers. And you cannot expect the young people of the future to be competent on IT technologies and to be entrepreneurial and to be good at communication and on, if they don't get the right teaching at school. So my point is that there has to be a far stronger effort to improve the kind of people to devote themselves to teaching, especially in public schools. This is, for me, a critical issue to make sure that we do give those opportunities to young African men and women. And the other point I want to make linked to this is that there is an extraordinary lack of investment in common global education infrastructure. There's a lot of investment on health, for example, but not so much in instruments to make sure that schools, teachers, countries can learn from each other what works in education. And my last point is that, contrary to common belief, it is not true that local circumstances matter so much that things cannot be transferred in education. We know very well what works in education. You need to have teachers that have the autonomy, the capacity, and the opportunity to teach well and to use technology well. So it's not that we don't know what policies work, it's that we need to implement them, and we need to implement them strongly and with enough money and by empowering local communities and institutions.
Thank you very much for that. I'm happy to take one more quick question now. So there's a lady over there, and then I'll do a second round, please.
Thank you. I'm embarrassed. I'm not sure. Ifenwa? Thank you. Wonderful presentation. I was wondering, you talked about the platform bringing your current businesses together on this massive electronic platform. I was wondering, do you use your platform members also to spark change downwards? So do you use them locally as mentors, as inspirers, or because we find that I come from the European Training Foundation, we're a commission agency based in Turin, and we work with local communities as well to look at how they empower change. And it's quite surprising sometimes how much a single individual can do. And so I was wondering if you use it also downwards, not just upwards, your platform. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I've got 3 questions. I'll go back to the panel. Jonas, let's start with you. Pick up some of the points that have been made, if you have some comments.
Yeah, I think to the first point around kind of the lack of devices, I think that can easily be, I'm not sure how many people are familiar with it, but there was a solar solution called M-Kopa in Kenya. Basically, it's a device, it's a solar device that has a SIM card in it, and you purchase it, and you only have to pay in monthly installments. If you've not paid your monthly installment, there's no electricity that month. So that basically allowed them to spread out the upfront cost and secured, the credit and the payback model. And that same model can be applied across all devices that can be powered, right? Whether it's phones, tablets, it can be the Oculus, like virtual reality gear, it can be computers, washing machines, TV. So anything that plugs in and needs power to operate can basically operate with that like installment type of model. So I think that is one way, and also phones, that is one way to really scale up the penetration of devices. Now that we've got the device, once we get the devices out there, I think to the gentleman's comments around education, not only are there enough quality teachers in the capital cities, a lot of our populations in Central and East Africa is extremely rural, right? Except for Congo, actually, which is quite urbanized. But a lot of it is extremely rural, so there is no way you're going to get a teacher that is worth anything to go work in a rural village or the number 5, the number 6, the number 7 town in the country. So we really have to sit down and after getting the fiber networks out there and the devices and the people I think we really have to reimagine the education provisioning infrastructure. And I don't know what the answer is, but I get a sense that the reason why we don't is because we're used to applying models and business models and solutions that work in the US or Europe and planting them over into Africa. But obviously, since these are not problems of US and Europe, we haven't kind of reimagined it. In fact, the mobile payment systems kind of came in almost by accident. It was not like somebody's business plan or anything. So
just to come back to that, so how would you reimagine it? How would you reimagine education?
I'm not an education expert.
No, but
I just
imagine.
have a few ideas. I think the quality problem can be addressed by there needs to be some sort of a central provisioning of the education curriculum, right? So that you're not tied to the quality of the teacher on the ground. So I think, and the teachers basically turn the teachers into more like administrators, so that the quality of the education of each student is not dependent on the quality of the teacher. In terms of how the students interact and the provisioning, I think speech is extremely powerful. There was just an article in The Economist, I think last week, about how the second half of the world is coming online and it likes to speak to the devices. In fact, the one country I noticed that happening, which is not a least developed country, was Russia. I had gone there for the first time over the summer for the World Cup, and I saw that people were rarely typing into their phones or using their hands with their phones. They used to just speak to their devices, and their devices speak back to them. And I know we have Siri and all that everyone kind of messes around with back home, but that's not necessarily how we interact with our devices and with the internet, I think, here, and how we have. So I think that immersive kind of childlike, using every bit of it, doing so. Obviously, once the devices are out there and in a couple of years' time, the development is there, I think virtual reality will definitely completely change how we think of the education landscape. So if you can imagine everyone with their Oculus gear, virtual reality gears, and kind of attending school virtually and so forth. So that will obviously get us to a whole different space, which is hopefully not too far
Thank
away.
you for taking us on that journey. It is a fascinating one. So Samir, you wanted to come in quickly?
First question about how to source bankable startups, especially. I think one of the ally, it was not the case 5 years ago, but one of the ally to investors are not the tech hubs, incubators, accelerators, because they are in contact with all the ecosystem, with the startups, with entrepreneurs, with the informal businesses, and they can select and they can do a pre-sourcing work to pre-select the companies that are the most advanced, and then connect them to the investors. Just to give you an idea, 10 years ago there were less than 10 tech hubs on the world continent. I'm talking about 54 countries. And now, according to the latest study from the GSMA, which is a mobile economy think tank based in the UK, but which is producing every year a report about tech hubs in Africa and in Asia, there are more than 400 and counting incubators in Africa. And also, I think, so I will not talk about education, but about healthcare. 2 months ago, I was in 2 remote regions in Kenya, 300 kilometers from Kisumu, and also in Thika, which is 2 important region of Kenya. And I followed the startup, which is actually working closely with the telco, with Safaricom. So they sealed a partnership with Safaricom to provide in rural villages, in the most remote areas of the Kisumu region, in a county which is very isolated, a partnership to provide through the mobile phones healthcare guidance, healthcare monitoring to the, for example, the pregnant woman, to the people that have no contact with hospitals. And they use, it's not MCOPA in this region, it's, I forgot the name, but it's like MCOPA. I've been in the house and I've seen how they use it, and it's a solar panel device where you can buy every day the energy, sending an SMS, and then they can recharge, reload every day their mobile phone, and with the mobile phone they can have access to this kind of services. And this startup, which is named C-Stock, now is scaling across Kenya and is especially targeting the bottom of the pyramid that doesn't live in the cities but in the villages, and is having a very big impact, saving lives, and using only a $10 mobile phone. And Safaricom is providing the airtime, and it's really impactful innovation.
Right. I'm going to go back to the audience and then come back to the three of you who haven't answered questions yet, but let's get some interaction. So the lady over here, could someone bring the microphone here, please? Right in front. And then I saw a couple of other hands go up. Yes. Okay, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Christine Larquin from SES, a satellite operator having satellite capacity over Africa. So one of the things I wanted to mention and maybe to ask to the audience is the fact that there is a lack of investment in connectivity. And of course, e-skills, entrepreneurship, e-services and the deployment of e-services for education of health is extremely important to reach rural areas. But if we want to connect the rural areas and the 50% not connected by mobile, we need to invest massively into new infrastructure and innovative infrastructure. But to do this, there needs to be more funds or donors maybe, or African governments committed to do this, right? And committed to invest into this. It cannot just be the private sector. I just wanted to mention this. We've been working in the EU-African Union Digital Economy Task Force, where 20 members were active, including GIS, from Europe and from Africa. And one of the main conclusions which happened last week on the 13th of June is that this is really what is missing. You know, investment, huge investment. Of course, regulatory hurdles needs to be also levered. I think we need to have more innovative way of using regulations in Africa to make this cross-border connectivity happen, to make the regional harmonization happen, to really boost and stop the fragmentation of the. So I'd like to address these questions. Do you agree with me that this is, or with the task force, I would say, that this is one, there are many other recommendations, of course, but this is one of the main missing link, knowing that innovative infrastructure, combinations of satellite, Wi-Fi, mobile to the rural areas could really boost the connectivity.
Thank you very much. I saw, yes, please. Thank you. Please.
Thank you. I just have a question and maybe a bit of clarification. I know that a colleague behind there was talking about the fact that education is a key component in terms of getting our youth into anything digital or skills. But at the same time, you alluded to the fact that it is very difficult to get good teachers, or even the private sector. We've worked before in the rural areas, and a lot of what I hear you talk about happens in the urban areas. As soon as you move in the rural areas, you're faced with what is really private sector here, or what kind of investment can you make here. A very much recent World Bank report said there is an education crisis. In Uganda, for instance, we had over 20 years was what they call the universal education, primary education. And now we've just found out that universal primary education was some people described it that it was empty in the sense that the children were at school, but they were not learning.
Okay, good.
So I want to know how have you, if you've met these challenges, and what are you thinking about in terms of the good things you're saying, so that we can be able to buy in the rural youth?
Thank you very much for that question. I'm happy to take one more question, if there is one from the floor. Okay, so let's turn back to you. So I think the two issues that we've sort of zeroed in on now that we haven't discussed so far is education, obviously teachers, but also the forms of education. So if you could go to that, and also financing investments that are needed. And our partners working together on these issues to pool their resources and get the connectivity side of things, the infrastructure side of things, but also the startups and the investments you need there. Is that happening? So let me start with Ali. Ali, could you come in on some of these issues? I'll go to Sabine, and then I'll go back to and everyone else. Please, Ali.
Yeah, first of all, the lack of connectivity is really an issue. That's a big problem. For example, Samir and my brother here say that, okay, they give the model, that MCOPA model, how we use the device, how they use the device. I think is the same, is pretty much the same model that we in Kuranjabo, what we are trying to do. And when our agent, they go to small rural area and in the village, sometimes we have a problem of network. And they have internet, but they cannot get access to internet. So they need to call back to the capital, and someone through the laptop have to activate the system and send them the code, even if the customer has paid, because the network, the internet is not reliable. And also there is another issue, the cost of internet, because for us to activate one system, one solar system, we need to have access to internet, and the internet is really expensive for us as entrepreneur that is starting. The cost is really huge, the cost of internet. We need a huge investment in this area. And this is going to be through like global partnership with the UA, the government, and so on. The private sector alone cannot solve this, obviously, and that's really obvious. So yeah, that's really challenging for us as an entrepreneur. We need to have access to internet. Even the question that about education, if there is internet access, I think that there is a lot of tutorials on YouTube. For example, to learn how to code in 70 minutes or 7 minutes. Like you can get the basic. Yeah, I know that you cannot code in 7 minutes, but you can get the basic, and there is pretty much good tutorials that you can learn a lot of things. This can, for example, be something complementary about the education that you're taking course in the classes. When it came, for example, to the gap, how we leverage as a startup, for example, there is an incubator. We have, for example, in Chad and in other countries, like there is an incubator. So we try to recycle computers and put that through the hub and through the incubator to students who never use computer. Even in the rural area, there is a caravan. I know that it's not enough, but this is what we are doing in our part-time to try to, as an entrepreneur who has access to these devices and know them how to use them, we try to, to sensitize people and to try to make them and put them in this place. But also with these recycled computers, through our hub and through our incubators, it's so accessible for people. If you have a computer you're not using anymore, you have to bring it just to the labs, and we are going to put that. There is a lot of people working on it, and they are going to give a second life to this computer, and so that can allow people are using to use this computer. But we also, as an entrepreneur, we are not only just giving light to people, but we know that we have a lot of things to do for the young people as mentors. So we try to give them advice. We try to, for example, to have a caravan to go to schools, primary to high schools, and we talk to them how technology can change life and how can you use technology by giving them an example, the real example that what happened in the US and Europe, but also what's happening here in Africa and how we are using technology to change people's life. And for them, also this is another way, another example, and they can see it and they can treat this technology. And also through the internship that we provide through our companies for students, when they come and they see that how to work in the startup area, because we got the opportunity to travel and to work for a startup in other countries. Some people didn't have this opportunity, and in Chad, what's the startup and technology, all these things is really new. It's not like Kenya or Nigeria. They are far advanced, far advanced in, compared to Chad. So this is as an entrepreneur, we try to give that, to give people access. So through education, but also, to sensitize them to some tools and to give them access sometime for the first time to computer as well.
Okay, so you're doing it on an individual level almost through your company.
Yeah, as individual level, so as a mentor.
Yeah.
So working with an incubator in the place, so we try to teach those people and these young people. But also there is a lot of other entrepreneurs.
Right, doing the same thing.
Yeah, doing the same thing. So we are like, as a movement, there is a solidarity. And as you say, that the TF, I'm using also this platform because there is a lot of interaction between entrepreneurs, someone who's in Nigeria and someone who's in Kenya or someone who's in Chad. We share like good practices. And also, this is like a huge movement going on in Africa, and I think Samir books will allow you to see that. It started. A lot of people who study in Europe and the United States are going back to the country.
Right.
A lot of them try to implement a new idea. They are coming with some pretty much a great project, and there's a huge movement going on. And it's still minor, but it can change something.
Thank you very much, Sabine, please.
Yes, I would like to come back to the issue of education because it's really a big issue. And you talked about people going or children going to school and not learning anything. And I think first of all is a question of numbers because demographic development creates also a lot of pressure on the governments because really to provide social services, education services for a growing number of children, it's just important. It's like that. It's not so easy. And I have been in classrooms where one teacher had to teach 100 children. So talk about quality. If you really have to address 100 children, it's difficult. You just can just occupy them some way, but they won't learn a lot. So there's a question. The next point is quality. We talked about quality of teachers. So you need a good teacher training, no? And you need gadgets or devices and so on. And I think there is not the one solution now. For instance, you could think about public-private partnership not with startups because they won't be able to do that, but the big companies who are selling devices. So they could also equip schools because they would also using this business model, they would also provide their future demand, no? Because if you really bring your device in a school, then you can be quite sure that maybe there will be a demand afterwards when the people won't have to buy them. So this could also, we have these examples in the TVET system, where really we get equipment from private companies, and for them it's a win-win situation because people get trained with their machinery and then they can expect that the machinery will be bought later. But it's one solution, but we need many. We need a lot now. And there might be others. We talked about how to get to scale. Yeah. You talked about e-learning, about blended learning. So I think we have also to think about really how to make use of the little number of teachers we have to make a very good use. And then the problem to get them to the rural areas. Now, living conditions in Germany in the rural areas are much better than in Africa, but we have also this problem to get doctors to the rural areas in Germany. And what the government now is thinking is really, because there's a certain competition really to start a career in medicine, so just to link the opportunity to start the career with the commitment to work for a certain number of years in rural areas.
Exactly.
So I think we have to think a little bit about this kind of incentives, or to pay them more money if they go to rural areas or something like that, to make teaching in rural areas more attractive. But there's not one solution. I think we have to be very creative.
Yes. Absolutely. Thank you very much indeed. Samir, is there, before you answer what question, is there an African country which could be kind of a model, which is really doing really well in terms of connectivity, digital connectivity, teaching? Is there a country that you could, sort of point to as saying,
will give 2 examples. One under the authority of IFENIA and one national model. Of course, the national model everyone is thinking about in the room is Rwanda, which has achieved quite a lot in terms of digitalization in the
Singapore of Africa.
Yes, and in the notes, Rwandan franc, you have a picture of a child using the 1 laptop per child program. In every notes of the I think the 1,000 or 2,000 Rwandan francs, you have this picture on the national notes, and they took technology and innovation as a way to catch up, especially in the last 5-10 years, and in every sectors, even in healthcare. In the healthcare sectors, this is what I explain in my book. They completely transformed and in French we say inversé, inverse. I don't know.
Reversed, yeah.
Yes, the mortality rates, which was very high, because there are a lot of rural areas with hills, and it's very difficult. Sometimes it takes 5 years, 6 years for an ambulance to reach a village when there is, for example, a pregnant woman having an hemorrhage, and using drones, for example, for the last 3 years, so it's quite impressive. In half an hour, they can reach, because the drone port is based in the center of the country. In half an hour, they can reach every point of Rwanda to deliver medicine, brood, extra, but also using an application, and the Ministry of Health has developed, in partnership with the UNICEF, an application named Rapid SMS to monitor and to, with an algorithm, to prevent with 2 weeks in advance the hotspots, the medical center that will have a peak in givings, where the not givings, in deliveries, babies.
Right.
So yes, and they digitalized all of this. But and the local example for me, because I have studied this with the CC Hub. It's in Lagos. It's the Yaba district, where the federal government, the entrepreneurs, the tech hubs in Yaba. Yaba is the epicenter of the tech ecosystem in Lagos. They work together to digitalize the neighborhood, the tech hubs, the incubators, providing the fiber to the entrepreneurs, but also to the libraries, to the schools, to the colleges. And it was ecosystem, local government, public, private, and also private companies that provided.
So really bringing people together.
And it worked. And I think the CC Hub is one of the lead of this project. Okay. I forgot the name. It's Yaba Innovate Lagos. The name of this project is Innovate Lagos.
All right, I need to move on. Have you got one more message that you want to pass?
Yes, I wanted just to.
Yeah,
I completely agree with what you say about bringing connectivity. About the task force recommendation, the question is who will bring the connectivity? Will it be the African nation, the African sovereignty? Will it be the Facebook or SpaceX that are already doing it? Actually, Elon Musk has already launched several hundred of satellites to connect Africa, but who will own the data?
It's not launched. Sorry.
Starlink.
No, it has launched 6.
Okay.
Yes, but the test is successful. So now he's planning to launch 10,000 in the coming semesters and years. But there are also grassroots initiatives. So so they will do it. They will do it. So, but there are also grassroots initiatives. 2 months ago in Nairobi, I've been with a startup named Brick, and they provide free internet, free Wi-Fi. They put it in the matatus, which is the public transport, and they send the signal because 80% of the Kenyan population, they don't have access to internet. Right. And they send this free signal, free Wi-Fi, to the people. They can connect freely. It's open source internet. So this also exists. And how we can empower this kind of initiative, make the government play its role to have its internet and not waiting for the Elon Musk or Mark Zuckerberg, because Mark Zuckerberg will launch also soon a satellite to connect Africa, because in the end they will they see Africa as a market and they will own the data they will collect.
We are already connecting today with a lot of satellite points, you know, so SES has a full constellation of satellites covering the whole of Africa. So we're already doing it today. We don't need to wait for Elon Musk or SpaceX. SES is a European company. So, I mean, on these questions, we need to do it in partnership with the African
that's my point.
Right.
startups, and of course, you know, this is absolutely important.
So you don't have a microphone, but I also would urge you not to actually be very short, because we said we wouldn't work beyond 6 in the earlier panel.
Excuse me, I just wanted to react to this.
Yeah.
We work with African local service providers, and for example, in Burkina Faso, where we are connecting with our O3B satellites, all of Burkina Faso with fiber-like backbone capacity, we have created, if you want, 2 satellite service providers in which we invest. We have opened a company with an African partner, and so we're actually creating local, I mean, it needs to be managed by the local partners.
Right. Thank you very much. If I could ask you to say a few words.
Okay, I think a lot's been said, and just to echo what my panelists have said, the magnitude of the problem in education, you know, often brings me to tears. But I think that Sabine said that rather than cry over it, we should get up and do what we can. And there are solutions at a macro level and at a micro level. And yes, there's a lot that government can do, but whilst we're waiting for that, there is a lot that technology can do. And we know that a 2-year-old picks up an iPhone and can do stuff on the iPhone. So that is cutting off years of training and education. You know, so we need to take a disruptive approach and a disruptive solution to education. And I think that technology and smartphones will help us do that, because the truth is, with smartphones, you can conduct business, you can transact business. And then also, we need to create ecosystems and solutions on the ground. The problem is in the rural areas. And if you create entrepreneurs in the rural areas, they will solve all the problems, the health problems, the educational problems. Just to give an example of one of our entrepreneurs who used to be a domestic staff on the verge of suicide, saw an advert of our program, applied to the program. In Nigeria, he said he applied and forgot about it because he thought, you never get anything in Nigeria, you have to know someone. But he was called and he made it through to the program. And today, his name is Zion. Today, he works in the Niger Delta and he owns 2 schools. And the schools are educating the poorest of the poor, the children of the poorest. And what he does is that he collects the school fees weekly, because that's the only way the parents can afford to pay for the school fees. And he is teaching the kids a job-creating mentality and not a job-seeking mentality. Teaching them how to see opportunities in their environment, and that is how they will come out of poverty. So if what is lacking in the old and traditional ways of doing things is passion. And that is why you have teachers who have apathy and do not have what it takes to really educate a child. And I think entrepreneurship has passion, and that is what we need to solve the problems in Africa, is to create entrepreneurs in those local areas where we have those problems. And every single problem Africa has is a business opportunity that entrepreneurs can solve.
So, thank you very much, and I'm really happy that we ended on such a positive note as well. So where people see challenges, we should see opportunities as well. So thank you very much indeed. We've covered a lot of ground. I think it's been a fascinating discussion. Thank you, all of you, for really contributing from your different angles and pointing to the changes that are happening. We've talked about educational reform, we've talked about creativity and passion, we've talked about regulation, digital infrastructure, and private-public sector cooperation, and of course the need for money as well. But I think where people like you are working, money will come. Okay, so please join me in thanking our panelists, and also let me just say that tomorrow at the European Development Days. We're having a conversation as well. It's a lab debate. It's on refugee integration through inclusion. It's at 15:15 tomorrow in room D4 at the European Development Days. So I hope I'll see you there. And once again, thank you for your participation and thank you to the panel.